So in part 3 I'm going to move on to essential workflow modeling tools, and I'll start with what in Max will be deleting and removing sub-objects. We'll be deleting and dissolving components in Blender. So the hotkey is X or delete. So if I select a vert and hit the hotkey, you'll be confronted with this substantial menu here, which might be a bit intimidating at first, considering in Max, you know, you've either just got delete or else backspace or control and backspace to remove edges and verts. So here we've many more options, and I'll be honest straight up, I don't really use this menu except for special cases. I have, if I bring up the end panel, Maxi Vasquez tools here, the interactive tools, I'm using Smart Delete here, and you can see I've got my hotkey set to X. So this does a lot of the stuff behind the scenes and behaves more like Max would. So I'm probably going to go into this plugin or add-on in a future video. I won't talk about it here. I'll just talk about what's in Blender, in case you know you don't want to use this, you want to learn the native tools. So I end to close that down. So if I bring up that menu again, delete vertices. So if I delete this vertex, you'll see it's deleting everything connected to it because of Blender's hybrid mode. You can see this gradient here that I've talked about a good few times now in these videos, and it's blending across, no pun intended, to these other verts. So it's connected to all these edges and all these faces. So when I delete it, it's going to delete all. And this is just basic sort of 3D modeling stuff that you'd be used to. But the difference in Blender, of course, is this hybrid thing. So now if I do it and delete verts, it's that face in the middle was selected, but I'm deleting the verts. Whereas if I had it chosen delete faces, it's only going to delete the face, even though the verts are connected to that and these other ones. So that's the difference, you know. And then the other one, then delete edges, and this, you see the result is different again, obviously here, because there's no edges connecting out to these faces, so it doesn't delete them. So that's the basic concept behind it, and you know what you might be more used to. So let's say I'll just select this edge loop here, and even though I'm in verts, remember when I select these, they're all connected to these edges. So the edge loop is connected with this hybrid mode, and I know I keep going on about this, but it's an important concept in Blender, so you don't have to keep switching through these all the time, sub-object mode or component mode. So next is dissolve, or I'll go over these first actually. Delete only edges and faces, delete only faces. So you can actually, as you've seen in previous videos, you can have verts and edges in space floating without any face connected to them, which you cannot do in Max. So you know, you can delete these faces here. So let's say I'll just select these verts here, which selects all these faces, and then I come down and I say delete only faces, and now you can see it's leaving these edges behind in space. So that's interesting and bemusing when you first come from Max. But I'll get on to the dissolving now. So back to where I was, I'll just select this edge loop or vert loop and dissolve edges, and that's the same as control backspacing in Max. And then you have your other options there, dissolve faces, dissolve verts, and that's going to remove the edges because it's connected to them. But say for instance I select this edge and subdivide, and then I can just dissolve verts, and that'll leave the edge behind. So it's worth just setting up a plane or whatever like this and just messing around with all of these, because as I said, it might be a bit intimidating at first. You know, that just behaves like your collapse that I showed in the last video as well. And edge loops then just essentially merges these faces either side together, collapsing or merging this edge loop into these. So it's just like removing an edge loop with the verts. So just have a play around yourself, and you get used to it pretty quickly. But as I say, then you can also explore that workflow, Smart Delete, from Maxiv's interactive tools for Blender, and that's the route I've chosen to go. So for instance, I'm just going to hit X here, and that menu is not coming up It's just going to go into face mode, select the face, hit X, and it's smart delete, so it knows from the context whether you're in any of these modes what to do. So that's what I choose to use rather than that menu. So hiding and unhiding sub-objects or components is the same as objects, exact same hotkeys. So if I select the face, it's H to hide, Alt H to unhide all, and Shift H is to hide unselected. So the same as those tools that we have in Graphite and Max, and also in the command panel. So those hotkeys are H to hide, Alt H to unhide, and Shift H to hide unselected. And then you can come in and work on these and then reveal them. So for instance, I want to just isolate an edge loop there, and then I can Alt H, and it's only going to operate on whatever was visible. So that's hiding and unhiding sub-objects. So next up is aligning sub-objects or components. The same way you can view align, axis align in Max, and then make planar. In Blender, there's two ways to do it. You can't just scale to 0 in Max the way you can just scale and just drag all the way. It's a bit fiddly. It's better doing it with the hotkeys, or else the align pie. And the align pie is built into Blender, but you have to enable it. And if I go to add-ons and just type in pie, you'll see these pie menu, 3D viewport pie menus. And if you come down, I have all the other ones disabled. You can have a look into these. There might be some useful ones for you. I just have the edit align pie, that's set to Alt X. So if I select an edge loop here and my hotkey is Alt X, you can see here I can align to 0 on the X, we'll say. So that's going to align to world 0, or we can align just to X, or in this case I want to align to Y. And that's based on, if I press full stop or period for our American viewers, that's based on where the pivot point is. So median point is just going to average them out to the center. And then active element, if I switch to active element, just undo that, make sure active element is active. And then let's say for instance I want to align them all to this. Well, then I'll just shift click and shift click again, and now you can see that becomes the active element. And then Alt X and align to Y, and now they've all aligned to the active element, which is very, very useful. And that's another kind of a concept in Blender that's useful for modeling. And the active element, you can rotate and scale around it. The pivot in general, you can use the 3D cursor as well. Individual origins, very useful. So next I'll select this loop here, and I'm going to show doing the hotkey method. So this can be quick when you get used to it. And that's our active element there. And I could also switch this back to median point if I wanted to average them out in the center. So I just press S to scale, and you see it starts to scale, and I want to scale them in X, so I press X. And now if I start to scale, you can see I can bring it into the center like I could in Max with the scale tool, but it's quite fiddly. So you just press 0 then, and then click to confirm. So that's S, X, 0, click. And then the same here. Select that loop, S, Z, 0, click, and because that's the active element, it's aligned to there. But I could have chosen this one as the active element. Then make sure to switch back to active element, S, Z, 0, click. So that's how to align. You have your pie menu and then your keyboard shortcuts. So you could also set these Alt X, and you should be able to, I haven't tried it, but you should be able to go in and individually set hotkeys like you might do in Max. For let's say the Alt X, you'd have to search for this then in your key map and just go in and individually set these so that you're not calling, if you don't want to call the pie menu. So next up is face normals, vertex normals. Blender has a more robust and modern set of tools than Max. Max has terrible normal tools, particularly explicit normals. The whole thing is broken, and I can't wait for it to all be fixed. Face weighted vertex normals, the whole lot. So just the basics here is up in the mesh menu here, normals, and you can see all the different options here. I'm not going to go into all these. This is just the basics with flip normal, and I think back face cull. It appears that it's not here anymore. It used to be here, and then face orientation was here. Maybe it's, oh no, it's not there. I'll switch to the workbench, and maybe it's here. No. Oh yeah, here it is, here now. So back face culling is on now. Sorry, it mustn't be. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's not supported in Eevee, but it looks of it. So into the workbench. You learn something new every day. Every day is a school day, as they say. Right, so now you can see that normal that I flipped is actually flipped. So I'll select that face again and mesh, normals, and flip. And you know, you might want to set that to a hotkey or put it onto your quick favorites. But the tool I'd use here for so let's say I'll select these faces, and I've mentioned this in and shift R then is to repeat last. So I flipped all these faces, and I mentioned this tool, and I'll probably do a video showing its features more in depth. Is the machine tools, and if I just hit 5, which is the hotkey for mesh cleanup, you can see here that it's recalculated the normals, and you can also flip the normals, and it recalculates them to the outside. So this is essentially the way the normals are pointing, and then when I flipped them over, they're pointing the wrong way, so it'll automatically recalculate to the outside. The same in Max with the normal modifier. You can do the same thing. So that's flipping normals, and I'm glad I went into that because I learned something myself, which is never a bad thing. So isolate selection is always, I always use that when I'm modeling. So Shift D to duplicate, X to move it out on X, and now the hotkey in Blender is /, and there's a bit of a weird sort of a visual sort of bug. This, you know, see the way it disappeared there. I don't know what's going on there, but just press it and then press it again. Machine tools that I just mentioned also has a nested isolate selection, or focus as it's called in Blender. So you're focusing on whatever you have selected. So Shift D, and same thing, you know, I want to focus on this. So I just hit / and it zooms in and zooms out. So in Max, isolate selection can get messes up your view. Sometimes you keep having to zoom in or out, but it's nice here the way it automatically just brings you in and out to where you want to be, where you'd expect to be. So that's focus or isolate selection. So attaching and detaching geometry from a mesh, select those faces, and P is the hotkey. So I want to separate or detach the selection. So when I click this, that's become its own object now, the same as if you just detach it as an object in Max. And I can also then, if you want to detach it as a clone, then you just Shift D to duplicate. Then is how you do that in Blender. And that's the same with everything. Objects, verts, edges, face. It goes all the way from verts, edges, faces, objects, everything. Shift D is to duplicate, and then immediately after you can just right click and it'll stay in place, or you can just press or move it then by pressing your hotkeys. I can also, rather than right clicking, just press Shift D and then X or Y or Z to move it then straight away. Or don't forget, you can also use your middle mouse button to lock to these, which is handy if you don't want to use the hotkeys. So make that selection again, P, and then you can also detach by material IDs and loose parts, which would be like elements in Max. So I'll detach that to its own object, tab out of edit mode, and now I want to attach both of these together. So that's Control J, and that's to join them, and then it becomes part of the mesh there. And then selecting elements in Blender is it's an important one there. You just hover over the element and press L. So there's no element mode, as you know from looking at these three here. So L is the hotkey to select the element, and you can see now they're still, all you have to do is hover over it and press L. You don't have to click the mouse or anything, or even select anything, just hover over and press L. And then obviously these are not welded, just as they would be in Max, so I can just press A, and then 5, and now they'll be welded because the mesh cleanup merges those doubles. And last but not least, we have the constrain tools, or slide tools as they're called in Blender. Unfortunately now Max's vert edge face and normal constraints aren't available in Blender to the same degree. We have these slide tools as you've seen in earlier videos. So if we select this row of edges here, or verts, and then just press G to move, and then G again, that's going to constrain it or slide it along that particular edge. Right click to cancel that, select the loop here, GG, and it's constrained to the edge. So there's no face constraints. There's weird sort of hacks and workarounds and things like that with shrink wrapping and cloning the mesh and hiding and all sorts of other crazy workarounds, but I just wouldn't bother with that. It's too much hassle for how often I would use it. So most of the time slide gets me there, you know. And then for normal constraints, you can just use the shrink fatten tool that I showed earlier, Alt S, and that's just going to move out along the normals. And the same then with vert slide, GG, it's just constrained to those edges, and then Alt S is to push in and out along the normals. And I think I'll leave it at that now for this video. There's some pretty important ones, and there'll probably be one more part of this with some more kind of extra sort of workflow tools that you'd be used to and would need when you're modeling. And then also I might do another video then on scripts or plugins, add-ons that are handy, just not the big ones like Hardops and Box Cutter and that, but some of the ones like loop tools and set flow and machine tools probably. So I'll leave it at that for this one. Alright, and hopefully it was in some way useful. Alright then, cheers, thanks, good luck.